Hey, it's Jordan. Delighted to be joined by Shahid Buttar. He's a congressional candidate running against Speaker Nancy Pelosi in San Francisco. And we're obviously going to get into updates of your campaign a little bit, but would be remiss not to start with, I mean, other than taking out Osama bin Laden, perhaps, I think one of the biggest assassinations with geopolitical consequences. So, obviously, we're talking about Soleimani, who was, by all accounts, number two to the Ayatollah in Iran. Um, I'll just go straight to you. You've been tweeting about it as far as Speaker Pelosi, your opponents, kind of complicity with this, as well as kind of this is, to me, very pretty much a redux to what we're seeing in the 2000s. I'm already seeing similar media condonement and rationalization for this. What are your initial thoughts of the Trump administration taking out, by all accounts, it would to the equivalent of maybe one of our top commanders or even a top official like a Secretary of State?
Yeah, this was a reckless act, effectively of war, and it invites needless escalation that will put hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of lives at risk at a time when we cannot afford it, at a time when we cannot justify it, at a time when we're poorly poised to project force across the region, and at a time, frankly, when we need to be retreating from the process and the project of neo imperial interventions to secure access to oil resources. That's been the story of American foreign policy for the last 50 years. And it is racing our species like lemmings off a climate cliff. That's at a strategic level. At a tactical level, to assassinate a foreign leader, especially one who has been, a lot of this particular person, the one who was targeted, Soleimani's work in the past, have been fighting ISIS. There is a complex array of interests in the region. And, this is one of the few places where I'll ever quote Joe Biden. What Trump did today was basically throw a stick of dynamite into a tinderbox, and it's incredibly irresponsible. And it's not just Trump. I mean, that's maybe one theme I'd want to get across, is that the war machine is bipartisan, has been for a long time. 15 years ago, I was marching in the street, organizing demonstrations, doing everything I could to try to stop a war in Iraq. I remained active after the invasion, and the anti-war movement that we saw then, we need very much to be active now. There's a march that I think is going to be coordinated across the country this Saturday, in which I'm looking forward to participate. And I wish that our elected leaders in Congress would abide their oaths of office and do their jobs. The first responsibility of Congress is to check and balance the executive branch. Nowhere was this more important for the founders than preventing a president from initiating wars. For lots of reasons. It wastes the nation's treasury. It costs lives. There is an incentive for the president always to do it because it contrives domestic support. And Congress should be asserting its powers. And under the so-called leadership of Speaker Pelosi, Congress has been entirely deferential. 2 weeks ago, the president signed a $750 billion spending bill that Speaker Pelosi ushered through Congress, and she resisted and successfully took out of the measure two different amendments that would have restrained the president at a time like this. That kind of supine deference to the executive branch is constitutionally disqualifying, especially with a tyrant in the White House. And I'm not willing to sit on my hands and watch this go down. It's why I'm running for Congress, and I'm looking forward to continuing my resistance to the military-industrial complex back to Washington into the House of Representatives.
And you mentioned the bipartisanness of all this. Obviously, Pelosi and the Democrats aren't making the decision to carry out this drone strike. But,
Sure.
I mean, the tea leaves were there. It was not reported much. Trump sent 1,500 troops in May to the Middle
Yep.
East to, quote, fight Iran. Then another 1,000 in June. So you got 2,500 sent in 2019 for some vague concept of fighting Iran. Meanwhile, like you said, Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats are giving him basically a blank check for this, including a space force, while simultaneously Trump is then able to basically blame Pelosi and the Democrats for things like San Francisco's homelessness, which obviously he doesn't care about, but that the gentrification, the homelessness is also bipartisan. But it just seems like both morally and strategically, Pelosi and the Democrats are not an opposition party. They're basically just kind of either asleep at the switch or complicit in what Trump's doing.
I couldn't say it better myself. I think they are exactly that. Either asleep at the switch and horribly ineffective at guarding the interests of we the people of the United States, or complicit and co-opted. Either of those possibilities to me is disqualifying. I frankly don't even care which one it is. And we could read tea leaves and try to decipher public statements and private commitments, all day to try to figure out, is it complicity or is it ineffectiveness? But I'm over it. I don't care anymore. I'm just eager to get new voices at the table who have demonstrated our commitment to fighting for we the people, to fighting for peace and for fighting for sustainability. We have a struggle on our hands against a bipartisan corporate rule. And it is the bipartisan aspect of corporate rule that makes it so insidious. In some respects, yes, there are divisions between the parties. They're pretty obvious at a time like this. But when it comes to war and militarism, when it comes to fossil fuel extraction and these underlying commitments that pose grave risks to the future, we have effectively one party, and it's a corporate party. And it's the corporate party that put Trump in office. It's the corporate party that continues to enable him. And as long as we look to the corporate Democratic Party for so-called resistance, we will continue to find what is ultimately more assistance. And that is unfortunately the story of Speaker Pelosi's tenure in office. She's been claiming credit for an impeachment process that she was late to show up for, that she effectively undermined at the outset by limiting artificially to excuse the president's worst crimes against the republic. And frankly, she continues to silence whistleblowers and keep members of Congress in the dark about executive secrets. These are all examples of serving executive secrecy, of serving the executive branch as the leader of the branch that's supposed to be independent, charged with the constitutional responsibility of checking and balancing the executive branch. Nowhere, again, is that more important than in war powers. Congress exclusively has the power to declare war, and this president is dragging us headlong into one using resources that Congress, under Speaker Pelosi's leadership, handed him. It was basically giving him a blank check and a loaded gun. And that's an incredible act of irresponsibility, given everything we know about this criminal, tacky, tyrannical president.
One last question on this before we get to domestic issues.
Sure.
What's interesting to me is you see the kind of same talking points out from Pelosi, W. Wasserman Schultz, other Democratic leaders on the constitutional point. For those that don't know, you're a constitutional expert, a constitutional attorney, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you know your Constitution, and it's just rank hypocrisy because I didn't hear Nancy Pelosi saying a word when President Obama was without any constitutional authority going into Syria. How about us? There's no constitutional approval for us to be basically aiding Saudi Arabia to commit genocide in Yemen. So if Pelosi remains Speaker, if she remains a Congresswoman, let's say President Joe Biden, do we really think President Joe Biden is then going to Congress for even, what they consider small-scale attacks or drone activities like this?
Or humanitarian interventions, I'm sure they'll call one. Yeah, no, of course not. The military-industrial complex is bipartisan. Joe Biden is one of its principal proponents. So is Speaker Pelosi. And, when they talk about the constitutional prerogatives of Congress to make war, they are right in their statements. The problem, of course, is they don't stand by those statements at any opportunity. Every time there's a vote in Congress to empower the executive branch, instead of remembering the statements that they make today when it's convenient, they do the convenient thing at the time, which is go along to get along, sign the bill, empower the executive branch, don't take the heat, don't stand up for principles. Who cares? This is applicable in the context of torture, immigration, surveillance, detention, war making. I could make this case in 10 different ways about how trade, pay-go rules, there are concentration camps. This is the story of Speaker Pelosi's tenureship, unfortunately, is enabling and empowering our criminal president while claiming publicly to resist him. And this is a time, especially when we are on the brink of a war that we can't afford, that we can't justify, that will place millions of lives at risk, destabilize a region. We can't afford that kind of deference. We need leadership, not deference. And unfortunately, the story of her tenure in Congress, not just in the context of war powers, but throughout her tenure, she has generally gone along to get along. And that's a real problem. And that's one thing I intend to fix, at least for our city's elected voice in Washington.
So as to your race, the primary is approaching in San Francisco. Obviously, you and I have spoken, and you've spoken elsewhere. I mean, kind of a case study on what happens with gentrification, Silicon Valley. It's interesting because there was a story that just came out about, Mark Zuckerberg. I think his wealth went up 25% in 2019. Other of the largest plutocrats in the country and the world wealth continued to, in some cases, double. Meanwhile, we're hearing the same things about, oh, the economy is at an old 50-year low, this and that. But if that's the case, why is there such this anti-establishment fervor? And how are you really tapping into that in San Francisco? What's been your kind of momentum since our last conversation? Probably 2 or 3 months ago.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks for asking. The momentum's amazing. I feel it every day. I can't walk outside anywhere in San Francisco without somebody telling me, so excited about your race, beat Pelosi. And now it's happened more than once before I make it to wherever I'm going. We raised $350,000 for the campaign to this point in the cycle from over 8,500 donors. We're racking up endorsements. And I think that you're probing at one of the essential aspects of the race, which is to say the dramatic divergence between the experiences of the 1% and the rest of us. And Speaker Pelosi is a great representative for the 1%. She fights for them relentlessly. And even here in San Francisco, though we do have a remarkable concentration of millionaires and billionaires, we are still a city of working people. And working people understand that we need to have affordable housing. Working people, and frankly, many billionaires understand that healthcare should be a right within the United States. The fact that we allocate healthcare according to what people can pay ensures that we have worse public health outcomes than anywhere in the world, and that we pay more for it. It's not even just the self-interest of we in the 99%. I think many people in the 1% understand that that is a stupid way to allocate healthcare. Similarly, when we look at climate justice and Speaker Pelosi's dramatic abdication of the interests of future generations, her deference to fossil fuel extractions, and the military-industrial complex that supports it, she is unfortunately standing on the wrong side of history. And those are among the reasons why I'm very confident about our opportunities to liberate San Francisco's voice in Congress. I'll also say that the ground game emerging around our campaign is inspiring to me. It's diverse, it's massive, it's loving. It's just an incredible community. We opened an office here about 3 weeks ago, or I guess about a month ago now, at the beginning of December. It was the office that previously had been rented by Chesa Boudin, our new district attorney who I supported during his race. And the first day that we had a mobilization at the office, 40 people came, and we distributed 10,000 pieces of campaign literature across a dozen precincts across San Francisco in one afternoon. Frankly, I don't think Speaker Pelosi has a chance to retain her seat, especially as long as she continues to empower a criminal, corrupt administration in Washington whose resistance she only displays theatrically and is nowhere to be found when it matters.
And I'd like to ask you, because obviously there's been, I don't know, some folks saying about you, well, why are you supporting this impeachment when it's going to help Trump? My view is like impeachment isn't about political strategy. If the president does something impeachable, you just have to hold him accountable, whatever party. I think there's plenty that Trump could have been impeached for before that. That is even worse. But what is your take? Because there are some on the left saying like, Trump's terrible, but you're basically, guaranteeing his reelection by being for impeachment.
Yeah, Jimmy Dore had a particularly colorful and indefensible way to put it that I'm looking forward to having a chance to address. He's having me on his show next week, and I'm looking forward to finally having a chance to speak with him.
Oh, great.
I'll be clear about this. Impeachment is a constitutional imperative, full stop. Anybody who views it through a political lens, I think, is frankly participating in the sullying of the process, and it shouldn't be political. It has to be constitutional, the motivations for it. But I want to press on that notion. First, it's not a legal process. It's much more a political process than a legal process, which means to say how you construct it matters. And for Speaker Pelosi to initiate an impeachment that was limited to a political crime, she focused only on one issue among the president's many crimes against the republic, and it was his invitation of foreign interference in a U.S. election that she thought was going to be the thing that we could hold him accountable for. And of course she thought that. She's a Democrat. It's an offense against her party. But here's the problem, and it is a criminal act that should be impeachable. And if we had a fair representation of the American people in the Senate, it would be impeachable, but we don't. Republicans own the chamber, and because it's an offense related to an election, we knew from the outset, I said at the outset, that if we roll only on that issue, the impeachment process will fail. I said that before she ever started. And I've been banging the drum for impeachment for a year before she ever showed up. And I said then what I will say now: if you're going to impeach the president, impeach him for corruption. His self-enrichment at the public expense, that's what flips votes in the Senate. There's nothing that enrages conservatives more than the idea of their tax dollars being misappropriated. And it is the president's theft of public resources that is the most compelling ground for impeachment. It is precisely what Speaker Pelosi refused to include in the articles. She also didn't include the president's human rights abuses or his lies to the press and Congress. There are so many things that are impeachable in his acts, his incitements to violence, and yet she chose to bring none of it. So I'm not going to defend Speaker Pelosi's impeachment. In fact, I would say the fact that impeachment is helping Trump is part of the reason why we need to replace the elected representative in California's 12th congressional district, because we can't have leadership of Congress that is that ineffective or alternatively complicit in the executive branch's self-aggrandizement at a time of this sort of constitutional crisis. That's why I'm in this race. That is literally what keeps me up at night, the demise of our republic, not at the hands of a tyrant, but of a supposed opposition that paves his road. And that's why I'm here. And I think that's why I'm going to win the race. I think a lot of Americans share that alarm. I think they recognize that controlled opposition is as much a problem as kleptocracy. And at the end of the day, whether it's trying to stop the next war, whether it's making sure we can all get to a doctor, whether it's keeping people in their houses, we need resistance to corporate rule, and we need a visionary alternative that puts people first. And that's what I'm here for. That's what I've fought for 20 years. And I think that's why the people of San Francisco are going to make me our next elected representative in Washington.
When is the primary? How can people get involved and support you?
Right on. Our primary is on March 3rd. You can find us online at shahidforchange.us or on any of the major social media platforms at Shahid for Change. Volunteer with us, contribute to the campaign, shout us out online, connect us to your friends. We're looking forward to continuing the movement to liberate the United States from our supported leaders. And I'm looking forward to joining the squad next year.
All right. Thank you so much on this important day, and we'll definitely keep in touch.
Thanks, Jordan.
Take care. Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statuscoup.com where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statuscoup.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you.